Okay. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Sayyid al-Anbiya'i wal-Mursaleen. Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bi fadlika ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. So it goes through unlawful things without ritual impurity. So it says there are 8 things that are haram, unlawful to do because of menstruation and postnatal bleeding. So you cannot pray. You cannot pray. And they debate the issue is, can you do qada? Right? Could you do qada of a prayer that you miss while you're on your period? So here's a discussion. Is a woman being given a rukhsa, she's given a dispensation that she doesn't have to pray while she's on her period? Or is it an azima? Is it a command that she cannot pray? Right? So if we look at it as a dispensation, then in general, she's being asked to pray in general, but she's being given that time off because it's physically difficult. And so it's a kind of dispensation. So there is, in principle, a general command that should just been overlooked, right? It's a bit like, for example, fasting while you are traveling, right? You don't have to fast while you're traveling. You do have to do qada later on, but you're just given this leeway that, you're traveling. It's generally difficult, so you don't have to fast if you don't want to, and you can just make it up later on. Is it a rukhsa like that? Is it a dispensation? Is it where Allah's just being lenient? Or is Allah not being lenient? Is Allah forbidding her to pray, right? So there's a difference. So if we say it's just a leniency from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then therefore it should be valid for her to repeat it later on. Obviously, it's not obliged to. We all agree. Form of dhahib, consensus, we agree that she doesn't have to do qada of prayers. But could she do that? Could she voluntarily say, I want to make up those prayers that I missed while I was on my period? Right? Or would it be totally haram in that Allah has forbidden it? So therefore, how could you do qada of it? That's like saying, oh, um, in my jahiliyyah, I didn't drink any wine. Before I was Muslim, I didn't drink any wine. So I'm going to do qada of that now. Like, what are you talking about? You don't do qada of it. What are you talking about? It was haram for you. So how do we look at it, right? How do we look at it? In reality, this ties into the concept of bid'ah, right? When people talk about bid'ah, what they mean is you are worshipping Allah in a way that Allah has not told you to do so. So therefore, this is an invalid act of worship, right? And so that concept, that's a low-level discussion. Concept of bid'ah is a low-level discussion. For certain people, it's a very important thing they talk about all the time, but it's a low-level discussion. A higher level of discussion is the concept of validity and commands. Is the concept that something is only valid if you've been commanded to do it. So that's this discussion here. Has a woman been commanded to pray, but then given that time off as a leniency? Or has she been commanded not to pray, in which case it would not be valid? So if when she became pure, she said, okay, that's it, I'm going to do qada, it would actually be invalid because she was not told. She was told not to do it, right? So is it A or is it B? It's an issue of debate in the Shafi'i school. I believe the reliable proposition is it is not valid. I can't remember exactly. Right? Fasting, right? So fasting is different. We know that she has to do qada, right? And so now here's a question, right? So we're not talking about can she. That was the question before, can she, right? We all agreed that she's not obliged to. She is not obliged to make up the prayers, but she is obliged to make up the fasts. What's the difference? Is there any, in terms of time, if you look at time, is there any difference between a woman missing a week of Ramadan and having to make up those few days throughout the year before next Ramadan, and a woman having to miss a week or so of prayers in a month and having to do qada every single month of basically a whole week of prayers? Could even be up to 15 days, right? In the Shafi school, right? Could be up to 15 days. So is there any difference in terms of time between these two?
Yes.
There is, right? Would it be very difficult for a woman to have to make up prayers every single month?
Yes.
right? And it wouldn't be, it's not duress, it's not actually gonna, it's not a life or death situation, but it'd be very difficult, and it would apply to all women, basically, right? Assuming she's not or she's not, hasn't reached puberty yet, or she's post menopausal, right? So it is not something that applies to one woman or two women or three women. It's something that applies to women in general. So it is widespread and recurrent, right? And we've seen this again and again in Sharia. That's something that is widespread and recurrent that calls for ease. So for a woman, if we take the argument that she has to make up the prayer, that she could make up the prayer, we would say, why would the Sharia not make her repeat the prayer? Because it is a widespread and recurrent difficulty, right? It is not duress, not life or death, but it is a widespread and recurrent difficulty, right? And widespread and recurrent difficulties are treated as if they're life and death. They're treated in the same way, right? And so fasting is not widespread and recurrent. It is widespread. It does apply to all women. So every single year, you're going to have these women after Ramadan saying, man, I wish I could just like, you know, I wish I could just fast the whole Ramadan. It's so difficult to do qada afterwards. Okay, but how many times a year does that happen? Once a year. It's once a year. So let's say this woman, for example, once a year, it would be so much easier for her if, which is not necessarily the case, but it's so much easier if she could just do 30 days in a row. Everyone else is fasting. They're in the fasting mode. It's easy. But now, subhanAllah, she has a very long period. She missed 15 days of fast, and it's really hard to get that, to get that resolve to make it up, specifically because she can make it up anytime. So she's going to be lazy and then do like two a month, and it's hard, etc. Right? It's not that difficult, nor is it that recurrent. So therefore, the Sharia does not recognize that. Right? So when you say difficulty, what do you mean by difficulty? Do you mean duress, as in life or death? Or do you mean very difficult and it happens on a regular basis and it applies to me, you, and everybody? Or do you mean a difficulty on a one-off basis? Or do you mean negligible? What do you mean? Right? There's levels that we have to look at. Okay. And so she cannot fast. So here's another question is like, subhanAllah, I was fasting the whole day. I am in Calgary in Canada, and it's a really difficult long day in the summer. The day is like 20 hours. I was fasting for 20 hours. 5 minutes before my 20-hour fast, my period started. I'm like, subhanAllah. That's so unfair. That is so unfair. Like, I mean, why I just suddenly my fast is thrown in my face, right? So is it true to say that if a prayer or a fast is invalid, that Allah has thrown it in your face? Is that true to say?
Yes.
It's true. So here's a question. Is acceptance the same as validity?
Not necessarily.
No. You could do a valid Hajj, but it's not accepted, right?
Yes.
You could do a valid donation. Like I had money, I gave it to a poor person, but Allah doesn't accept it. And is it possible that you do an invalid action, but it's accepted? For example, you prayed.
No.
No, it could be.
No.
It could be. So you prayed, for example, and right at the end of the prayer, before you gave salams, you broke wudu. So Allah accepted it from you, but you're gonna have to repeat it.
If the person didn't know, that's it.
But they did know. So right, so they were praying for 2 hours, mashallah. Two rakahs, they prayed for 2 hours. Right at the end of it, they went out to give salams and they broke the wudu. So whether Allah accepts what they did is one thing, whether or not it's valid is something else. Whether Allah accepts something is something between you and Allah, right? Whether it's valid or not is something between Allah and you. What's the difference? When I say it's valid, that means Allah is telling you, yeah, I'm not asking you to do it again. When it's saying it's invalid, Allah's saying, I'm asking you to do it again. Right? Whether it's accepted, I don't know if it's accepted. That's a message that's from between me and Allah, and inshallah Allah will accept it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may accept something even though it's invalid. You fasted for 20 hours, sister. MashaAllah, it's very hard. It was difficult. It's just before your period. You weren't feeling good. It was really hard. And Allah accepted it, even though it didn't count, even though it's invalid. because your period started 5 minutes before Maghrib, right? So there are two concepts are different. One is reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah's love of you and Allah accepting you. The other one is the technical label you give to something in order to know whether you have to repeat it or not. They're not the same. So somebody, for example, they died at Arafah, right? We all love to die at Arafah. Yeah, but that means if they did Arafah, they didn't do the tawaf, so their Hajj doesn't count. So now the Hajj doesn't count. So we're going to say, Fareed, you died before you performed Hajj, so therefore, because your Hajj didn't count. So therefore, we're going to have to, and you were obliged to do Hajj when you ever didn't do it. So therefore, we're going to take money from your inheritance before we give your children and your wife the money, and we're going to pay somebody to go on Hajj, right? That's called invalid. It was an invalid Hajj in that you did not fulfill the conditions, the integrals of Hajj. Does Allah accept it or not? That's up to Allah. Did Allah accept it or not? Right? So acceptance is one thing, validity is something else. They are so it could be your prayer could be valid and accepted. Your prayer could be valid and not accepted. Or your prayer could be uh, invalid and not accepted. Or your prayer could be invalid but accepted. Right? I remember like one of the best khutbahs I've ever listened to was a totally terrible Quran recital. Like the pronunciation was really, really, really bad. Right? The pronunciation was really, really bad. It was almost difficult to understand what on earth he was saying in the khutbah and during the prayer. Right? But I was really moved by it. So that doesn't mean it's okay to go and do a khutbah like that. But maybe Allah will accept that person's khutbah and will not accept somebody else's. So acceptance is, will Allah reward that or not? That's up to Allah. Totally different discussion. Okay, so key concept that we need to share with our kids, we share with ourselves, is, oh man, my fast was broken because my period started. Does that mean Allah didn't accept what you did? No. I mean, Allah, inshallah, if you had a good niyyah, Allah accepts everything you did, every single thing you do. He accepts tenfold, but He's asking you to repeat that day. That's all. That's all it means. He's just asking you to repeat that day. That doesn't make it unaccepted. Does that make sense?
Yes, Sheikh.
Right? It's like somebody says, "Oh man, I opened an orphanage and then I started this orphanage and I put some people in charge and they abused the children. I feel really bad." Okay, well, did you have a niyyah? Yeah. Was it a good intention? Yeah. And did you do your due diligence? Yeah. And did it all go wrong? Yeah. Okay, what's that got to do with anything? So whether it went wrong has nothing to do with your ajr, your reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Like the Prophet ﷺ, he said, you have a reward for every single child you give birth to, even if it's a miscarriage. So imagine this woman's continued to have a miscarriage, right? She had one child once, then after that, just continual miscarriage, 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 miscarriage. So it's an invalid child, right? You didn't have a child, but you get the ajr. You have the ajr, right? Or the Prophet ﷺ, he said, any man who marries a woman with no intention of fulfilling her rights, he meets Allah as if he's a zani, as if he's a fornicator. So it's a valid marriage, but it's not accepted by Allah, right? All the conditions were there, it's valid. You got married, but Allah didn't accept it from you. Right? So invalidity does not mean not accepted. It's not the same thing. Okay, reciting the Quran. So can you recite the Quran if you don't have wudu? Yes. You can recite the Quran if you don't have wudu. Can you recite the Quran if you are in janaba? No. If you need to make ghusl, you cannot recite the Quran. Right? Can you recite the Quran if you're menstruating? The answer is no. Okay, that is the position of majority of scholars. Now, Imam Malik, he says, yes, you can. It is totally fine and halal for a woman to recite the Quran without condition when she's menstruating. Now again, why? So Imam Malik is look at this, he's looking at this and saying, look, here is a woman, she recites Quran. Here is a woman who on a monthly basis has her period. So on a monthly basis, she has 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, up to 15 days in principle, right? In the Maliki school as well, they can go up to 15 days of period, in which case when she's not reciting the Quran. How can we expect women to memorize Quran? How can we expect women to recite Quran? How can we expect women to interact with the Quran in that way? So he looked at it from the same thing. He's not saying it's an issue of duress, but he's saying it is a recurrent and widespread difficulty, right? So for a man in janaba or a woman in janaba, it's not a big deal. Sister, brother, you can just go and make ghusl. It's not the end of the world. Oh, it's difficult. I don't want to have a shower. It's like, okay, you're just lazy. But a woman in a period, she can't just go make ghusl, can she? Because it's not in her hands to end the period. So Imam Malik looked at it in another way and said this is a recurrent and widespread difficulty, and a woman, so she can unconditionally, right? When we're talking about reciting the Quran, we're not talking about anything else, reciting the Quran. She can recite the Quran without condition, whether she needs to, whether she doesn't need to, whether she's a teacher, not a teacher, regardless. Okay?
Secretary, can I ask a question?
So now go ahead.
When you say recite the Quran, are you saying like with the Quran in your hand,
No, I'm
all
talking about
Arabic?
I'm actually making the sound of the Quran with the lips.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to see something else here. So in the Shafi school, then Hanbali school, Hanafi school, same thing. You cannot touch or carry the Quran in when you're in janaba, if you need to make ghusl, or if you are need to make if you're on your period, right? Because of the verse of the Quran, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and nobody touches it apart from the purified. Um, Now here again, Imam Malik, he says an exception. He says, okay, well again, here we have widespread difficulty for a woman. Okay? But key concept. We are looking at two variables in reality. When we're talking about duress, right? Does duress allow all haram things? So does a life or death situation allow every single haram thing? Let's try and think about something that you couldn't do even if you're in a life or death situation.
Give up your faith?
Yeah, so you could you say something with your tongue though?
Yes.
Yeah, so you could, for example, somebody says curse the Prophet ﷺ or I'll shoot you. You have an option. You could either die as a martyr or you could curse the Prophet ﷺ with your tongue, right? Okay, but could you actually leave Islam? Could I say at gunpoint, I want you to actually leave Islam in your heart? Are you allowed to do that?
No.
No. Why? Because leaving Islam is far worse than dying. So when we're talking about duress and difficulty and these things, in reality we have two variables. We have the harm or the level of the haram that is being done, which is not all the same, and we have the level of difficulty. So in reality we have a kind of do a little diagram right here. One second. How do I do this? We have a graph. This is what is happening. Now the fuqaha, yes, they'll disagree in how they apply it, but they agree in the concept, the system. So on one side we have the difficulty, right? How bad is it? And then down here, say the harm slash sin involved, right? So when something is allowed, How does it work? It is that the difficulty has to be more than the harm involved. Um, Something simple. Yeah. So here we have difficulty, and here we have the harm or the sin involved. Okay? So I have a situation, for example, that is down here. It's not a good example. But it's down here. There was great difficulty involved and very little sin. This is very different to something that's here, where there's a lot of sin and very little difficulty. Okay? So, when we say you can do it because of difficulty, we're saying the following. We're saying the why, right, difficulty, right, is greater than, can't do the little sign here, greater than is greater than the harm slash sin involved. That's what we're saying. So that's what the Shariah is doing. So when Imam Malik is saying, oh yes, a woman, we're saying, so a woman, for example, there is difficulty and in a woman not reciting Quran, right? Let's look, I'll give you another example. You can pray a sunnah prayer on a small vehicle, like a horse or a motorbike or a car, but you cannot pray the fard like that. So look at the recurrence, how many sunnah prayers there are. Okay? There's tons of them. So the difficulty is higher. Okay? The difficulty is here. And the harm is maybe here. So it's like something like something like this. No, I don't know. Here. Okay? Something like this. Whereas in the fard, this is the fard prayer, right? The fard prayer, the harm in messing up the fard prayer is greater. And the recurrence is lesser. So it's probably down here. So when you're telling somebody, oh, I can pray a fard prayer sitting down, right? Is very different because I'm on a journey, is very different. So the difficulty of stopping and praying the fard prayer is not that hard, right? So one thing is allowed, the other isn't, because there's less harm in praying the sunnah prayer sitting than there is in praying the fard prayer sitting, and there is more difficulty in asking people to pray all of their sunnahs there's more harm in asking people to do that. So it's totally different. So one thing's allowed, the other thing isn't. You see that? Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes.
Right? And so similarly, sometimes you might have a difficulty that's really, really high, right? Life or death, but it's not actually as bad, right? So it has to be basically, if you could draw a little diagram, draw a line here, I'm going to do a line here. Forgive me, I like maths. I think it's quite useful. Right? Things have to be on this side of the diagram. On this side of the line, the difficulty is greater than the harm. On this side of the diagram, the harm is greater than the difficulty, right? And so what you might actually have is some things down here, right? Where the harm is not that much, the difficulty is kind of significant. And so we're not really, when we're talking about change in the Sharia, we're not talking about duress alone. We're talking about life and death. We're not talking about 100%. We're talking about what kind of level and how high, right? And so going back to the question I asked before, I said, is it every single haram thing that changes to halal under duress? Not everything. Like you can't leave Islam, right? Couldn't do that. Um, you can't kill somebody else or put a gun to your head and say, "Hey, if you don't kill this person, I'll kill you." So, oh, I was forced. No, because it's the same. There's no difference, and so you just have to die, right? Rape, right? A woman is told, "If you scream, I'll kill you," right? And so she has to scream and just die. She doesn't have a choice, right? Obviously, assuming that she could be heard. Obviously, there'd be no point in screaming if she couldn't be heard. But um, the point is, if a woman or a man, may Allah protect all of us, in a situation of rape, you cannot succumb to rape because on the pain of death, you can't do that. You just have to die, and that's it, right? If it's an issue of, let's say, for example, there was some person who could mind read, right? He says, "Leave Islam in your head right now, or I'll kill you," and he could mind read, right? So he knows if you don't actually leave Islam, then he'll kill you and say, "Oh, I had to." You didn't know. It's not the truth. Okay. So if you look at this diagram, then the Shafi'is and the majority of scholars who say it is not a duress, asking a woman to not recite Quran is not a big deal. Asking a woman to not touch the Mus'haf is not a big deal. The difficulty is down here. There is significant harm. You are doing something haram, so you're significant harm, but maybe it's here, right? So, um, so you can't, you can't do that. Just give me 1 second, please. Okay. So we for the majority of scholars, so they put it here. For Imam Malik, again, it's a judgment, right? It's called a judgment. So what he did is, for Imam Malik, he says reciting the Quran, okay, is here, okay. I'm going to move it down a little bit. Reciting the Quran is there, okay. So now, touching the Quran, is touching the Quran worse? So touching the Quran without wudu, is that worse than reciting the Quran, or is it equal?
Are you asking while a woman is menstruating, or?
Yeah, a woman is menstruating, she does not have wudu, okay? So now she's going to recite Quran. And now she's going to touch the Quran. Is that worse than reciting the Quran, or equal?
Perhaps a bit worse?
Okay. So now we're going to put it over here. Okay? So now it's over here. And so in this scenario, if it's worse, okay, then is it going to be halal?
No.
No, right? Because we can see in this line here tells us, everyone's following, right? Please tell me if you're not following. If you're not like math, you don't like X, Y charts, then tell me. Okay, because this line tells us if you're this side of the line, then the difficulty is less than the harm and the sin. And so it does not allow you to do that. Okay? Whereas if you're on this side of the line, that means the difficulty is greater than the sin. And so you're allowed to do that. Everyone's following? Yes? Azhar, Husna, Muhammad, Noor, Sardar, Tigist.
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So now I come
Yes.
along, I'm a woman, and I say, oh, Imam Malik, I'm menstruating. I heard you gave a fatwa that I can recite the Quran without condition if I'm menstruating. He says, yes. So why did you say that? Oh, because there's a lot of hardship and the harm is not so great, but there's a lot of hardship and that's not good. So you can do that. So then you say, hey, Imam Malik, can I recite the Quran? Can I touch the Mus'haf without condition when I'm menstruating? He says, no, it's haram. Okay. So now you go back to him and say, oh, Imam Malik, so I can't, as a teacher, as a student, I can't touch the Mus'haf. So no, you can. Okay, why? Because now the hardship is greater. So now here, you can't touch the Mus'haf. But if you're now a teacher or a student, yes, you can, because now the difficulty is higher. See this? So when the harm increased, he had to put the conditions higher. Does that make sense? The harm increased, which is touching the Mus'haf versus reciting the Quran. So now the requirements to be able to do that, it's going to go higher. Is everyone's following me?
Yes.
So
Yes.
this diagram, Imam Malik did not draw this diagram. Imam Shafi, nobody drew this diagram. This is my diagram. Okay. But this is what they're doing. This is how this is the behind the scenes. Right? Behind the scenes. We mentioned the same thing. I'm just going to give another example of exactly the same we talk diagram. We can see at play with we did this just a long time ago about where was it? Funerals. Oh, that funeral. Dardir. Right? You can see exactly the same discussion happens again and again and again in fiqh. Everyone's doing the same concept. Now they disagree when it comes to the specifics, right? How do we actually fill out the diagram? But the concept of the diagram is there, right? So look at this answer we gave some time ago. This is from Ahmed Dardir in his commentary on the Khalil in the Maliki school, right? So it says it is permissible for an old woman who is not found attractive by men to attend anyone's funeral, right? So where is the harm here? Okay, what is the
Attraction.
harm in a woman who is not found attractive by anybody to go into a funeral?
It's
Right?
very low.
It's yes, it's like so it's like negligible almost, right? I mean, so here I'm gonna do right, here we go. There's four scenarios. So each of these four scenarios fits in a different place in this diagram. Okay. So here is what is the harm of a woman going to a funeral? Nothing. Okay, what's the benefit? Well, it's good, you know. So there's no reason why it should be haram. Okay, it is permissible for a young lady from whom no temptation is feared to attend the funeral of someone whose loss is very heavy for her, such that her father, such as her father, mother, husband, son, daughter, brother, etc. So look at how it is, right? So diagram, the first scenario was here, right? There is no harm really and some difficulty. Like people need to go to funerals. It's a good thing, right? So it's like here. So it's clearly fine. Okay. Then he moved over here. It's a young lady. Okay. Young lady meaning not 90, by the way. Right. So women, uh, people say, oh, young lady. We're not talking about, we're talking about somebody who in general women would be men would find attractive, even if you're not particularly attractive. People you don't cause traffic jams. That's what they're talking about. Think Ajuz meaning super old, right? That's what we're talking about. Like super duper old. Nobody would ever find that woman attractive ever, as opposed to, okay, I'm not a model. Okay, but that doesn't mean not attractive. Okay. So now it goes over here. She's a young lady. Okay. But then what okay, why did it become halal? What pushed it up into can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
So what pushed it up in scenario number 2? She says it's permissible for a young lady from whom no temptation is feared to attend. So notice the fact that she's just young, even though she's not particularly attractive. They moved it from no harm to harm. Okay? And so now he says it's permissible, whose loss is very heavy for her. What moved it up?
Well, two things, right?
What moved it up? So here's a question. I'm a young lady. Can I go to anybody's funeral?
No.
No.
No. But I'm not attractive. Can I go to anybody's funeral? No. Okay, but I'm a young lady who's not found temptation, but it's very difficult for me. So if so by default, she's here, she cannot go. But then they say, no, Habibi, it's not like that. So why? Because it is very difficult for her. That's her husband, for crying out loud. It's her son that just died, right? So now we're going to move it up to, whoops, move it up to, here, 1 second, trying to drag this. 1 second. Delete it. It's not here anymore because it's harder. So now the conditions are higher. Okay, we're going to put it here now. So now it's here because it became harder, right? Or because it became worse, there was more harm, the criteria went higher, right? So if the funeral, if it is the funeral of someone other than this, then it is offensive for her to attend. I'd actually put impermissible, right? It says it's offensive, right? So he kind of put it, in that category anyway. If it is feared, not known, if it is feared that she'll be a temptation, then it is unconditionally forbidden for her to attend, i.e., even if it's her husband's funeral, she can't go to it. Because now the harm is where? So now it's really difficult. It's not life or death. She's not going to die. But let's say, for example, it's here. Okay? Or it's here. Right? And in reality, putting it there is not very good. Putting it there is not very good because when we talk about temptation, temptation is not the same as touching, is nor is the same as intercourse, right? So in reality, all of these things have, zina. Like so you have to understand, like the fuqaha, they do understand, they're not ridiculous. They're not saying, you're telling me that I'm a very good-looking lady. I am just because I'm a good-looking lady, I am gonna be raped, or I'm gonna like do something like shameful at my husband's wedding, funeral. Is that what you're trying to say? No. So it's not actually here. Here is like really bad things would happen. But we're talking about less than that. So in reality, it's kind of like here. But what they're trying to say is, sister, I understand how difficult it is, but someone like you should not be around people like that. Go there privately. Don't be around other men, right? Because it is a genuine harm, right? So the point is they're saying there's more harm than benefit. Okay, so this is the system. Again, we can find countless scenarios again and again and again and again and again. This diagram, right? Albeit, this is what the fuqaha use, albeit in different ways. They make different estimations, they judge things in different ways, and that's just how it is, right? But that's what they're doing. They're trying to weigh up. They're looking at duress up here, widespread difficulty, super widespread difficulty, and they're trying to weigh it against the harm or sin involved, or potential harm and potential sin, for example, involved, and trying to weigh these things up. So when we see the Sharia changing, we're seeing that this crossing the line, that it was here and then it became here. So it's not every single scenario. It's not in every single scenario that something is haram that only becomes halal because of duress, because the haram might be down here, right? So for example, is it halal for a man to walk around in his house naked in the Shafi school? No, it is not. Okay, so what are you supposed to, how are you supposed to have a shower then? How are you supposed to change? So, that's okay. So the harm was like here. Sorry, the harm was here. So here's a man walking around his house naked for no reason. It's here. All it had to take was gharat sahih, some valid reason. You're changing, you're hot, you're cleaning, you're some kind of valid reason. There you go. Now you can take your clothes off. It's okay. Right? So it was not always duress. It's not always duress that is needed. But it has to be that the difficulty has to be greater than the harm or the sin. Right? Does that make sense?
Sheikh, can I ask a question going back to the funeral?
Yes, go ahead.
Um, so if a woman dresses, like say wears a niqab and everything's covered except her eyes, and this is her husband's funeral,
Yeah, so
or
that's that so that's so it somebody could still be attractive even if they're wearing niqab.
and if the kids are like distressed and because they just lost, say, their dad, that would still be haram for the mom or the
So
wife
so
to
basically
attend.
this woman, let's say so if sometimes here, for example, let's say it's Helen of Troy. Okay. So Helen of Troy, she becomes Muslim, alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, her name is Alina. Okay. Helen of Troy, everybody knows how amazingly good looking is she. We don't have to see her. So the fact that she's present in the country stops traffic. You know what I'm saying? Like that's
Hmm.
that's how it is, right? I mean, and so now we can use the same diagram here, ages of people, right? Are we talking about teenagers mingling here? Like there's a bunch of teenagers, or are these a bunch of like who's going to be at the funeral, right? So a lot of these things about okay, who's going to be at the funeral? Okay, there are 5 old men who are at this funeral, and this woman is very good looking, but she's in her 50s. Like, is that the same as a bunch of teenagers hanging out? Right? And then, oh,
Hmm.
we heard that there's a new boy in class, and all the girls start giggling. You know what I mean? Like, there's there's a big difference, right? And so well, the point is, we have to recognize the harms and the benefit, and do them appropriately, right? So you can say, I remember there's a question about this in Egypt, okay? In the south of Egypt, a woman not attending her husband's funeral, the question was, if I don't go to my husband's funeral, people will think that I knocked him off.
Hmm.
Like that's actually part of the culture. The culture is women go to the funeral. So what am I supposed to do? Like this will like ruin like everybody, and it's like tribal in south of Egypt. It's very tribal and very like people aren't educated. It's not like the north of Egypt. People are educated at the schools, etc. South of Egypt is very like rural and tribal. And so his lady asked this question to the Mufti, like, if I don't go to it, like it could actually cause like a huge problem. Like I might have like 10,000 people outside my house saying, "Hey, did you kill your husband or something?" You know what I'm saying? As opposed to, "Hey, I'm in the West, I can do what I want." Right? So we have to weigh things up in different things. What will this mean politically? What would this mean on this level, on that level, etc. Right? And so, but the default is those variables that they're working with. Does that make sense?
Yes, just like a parent.
Right? So, for example, you say, "Oh, I live in Palestine or in Jordan, and I have a big family, so it's not a big deal that my mum doesn't go to the funeral." You know, it's like when somebody dies, there was like 500, 1,000 people involved. So it's like, yeah, the kids are gonna be with this auntie, with that auntie, or with these uncles. So like, there's like 200 uncles you're gonna go with. So you feel like I'm part of something, and everyone's giving you hugs, and there's whatever traditions that they do, and there's a culture. Okay, well, as opposed to, oh, I'm here in the West, and it's like, yeah, it's just me and my mum, and then my mum's at a funeral, so it's me by myself, and I'm 12 years old going to my dad's funeral. We're like, what? You know, and the funeral is like 12 hours away, so I'm gonna go on a, you know, in a car by myself, crying my eyes out. My mom's not even here. You know what I mean? Like it's totally different. Like when you say, so this diagram will change in different scenarios, right? And so going back to Imam, but what I want to demonstrate with Imam Malik is suddenly something became worse, so therefore the criterions became criterion became stricter. So the Malikis, they say a woman can recite the Quran on her menstruation unconditionally, but she cannot touch the mushaf unconditionally. Rather, she has to be a student or a teacher, and she has to have a need to touch it, right? She has to have a need. So she couldn't just say turn to page 5 because the kid could not read the letter 5. And so the kid, for example, doesn't have arms. And so they're there, and the kid is trying to turn the page with his nose. Right? And it's like, what do I do? I'm a Quran teacher, right? That's what I do. I need to help this kid turn the page. I need to make sure the kid knows which page. The kid does not know what line I'm on. Like, oh my God, line 5. And he cannot count to save his life. Like, subhanallah, it's line 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. And he had to share like this word. You see the fatha? You're pronouncing it as a dhamma. It's not a dhamma, it's a fatha. That kind of scenarios, right? So when she generally needs to touch it, then she has to touch it. Otherwise, she doesn't have to do so. Right? Does that make
Sheikh
sense?
Khalid, do these teacher/student exceptions exist in the Shafi'i school as well?
For a woman reciting in a period?
Yeah, for example, if
No,
if it's like a Hifz
as far as
student.
I know, it only exists in the Maliki school. It doesn't exist in any of the madhab.
Okay.
Right? So basically, the other madhab are saying it's somewhere here. What are you talking about? A woman reciting Quran or touching mushaf is here, perhaps, or here, and there's no duress, not a big deal, right? And subhanallah, some of these things would also change with the way that post-industrial revolution, right? So, so imagine, for example, I have a one-on-one Quran teacher. Okay, whenever I'm free, I contact her. Whenever she's free, she contacts me. We do not have a schedule, right? We don't have a schedule. Versus you do have a schedule. So you can imagine even a Shafi or a Hanbali saying, in fact, and this is what, like I know like strict Hanafis who give the Maliki madhab because they say, look, we are living in a post-industrial revolution world where people work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or Sunday to Thursday, depending where they are in the world, right? And you don't have a week off, right? What woman is employed to teach in a Islamic school or any school, right? The default is all schools should be Islamic schools, and she has a week off randomly here and there. And given that what 1 in 3 women have irregular periods, that would be ridiculous. Who's going to hire a woman then? If I have to hire a woman, like I don't know, sister, when you're going to come in and not teach. Like, what's the point, right? So there, you could imagine even a Hanbali or a Shafi or a Hanafi either giving the Maliki thing or saying, no, from my own principles, this should be okay because look, like this is really difficult. This woman does not have a job. This is her job, or not even she doesn't have a job, but like you have to have a Quran. So if you did that, suddenly this woman is now taken out of the normal government school systems that exist throughout the world, and she cannot teach because she has this system where she kind of wants to just leave work every now and then. It becomes a bit ridiculous, right? So the need is clearly very high, right? But what I'm trying to say is try and demonstrate the diagram, that's all. Make sense, inshallah?
Yes.
Okay. So going back to the text, touching and carrying the Quran in the Shafi school, no, we do not. Their judgment, right, is no. The need is not that high. It's haram. You can't do it. So the exception though is carrying the Quran when you're not carrying the Quran per se. So this is not an issue of need. This is an issue of what do you mean by carrying the Quran, right? So I'm carrying a bag in which there is a copy of the Quran. So I'm not carrying the Quran. I'm carrying a bunch of things. I didn't pick up the bag for the intention of the Quran. I just picked up the bag because it's a bunch of things I'm picking up. Or you have a pocket Quran in your jacket and you break wudu. Or she starts a period. So now she's saying, "Oh, I mean, I'm carrying the Quran. I guess I'm carrying it, right? Like I'm wearing it." It's true, but you're not carrying the jacket for the Quran. You're carrying the jacket. So that's not the same thing. So that's not an issue of need in the Shafi school. That's an issue of definition. Like, what do you mean by carrying something, right? You're not literally carrying it. You're doing something else right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we have a similar scenario though is what? Actually we do, which is children. In the Shafi school, children can touch and carry the Quran, according to Ramli and Ibn Hajar, for a class. Right? So here's a kid going to Quran class. Is it easy to make sure an adult has wudu?
Yes.
Relatively, right? It is possible that you might have a lying imam who prays regularly without wudu. Right? That's possible. You could have an imam that's like that. And you find out Judgment Day that he never had wudu when he's leading the prayer. It's possible. But that's not very common. That's a rare scenario. Whereas children, it is generally hard to know if little kids have wudu or not. Right? So the Shafi'is, they break down kids then into three categories. Category number one is you're a kid, but you're not a kid. You reach puberty, in which case you have to have wudu, right? Like in any other adult. You're an adult in reality. Category number two is you're a toddler. You cannot have the mushaf or any sacred text in your hand because you're going to chew on it or throw it on the floor. So a toddler cannot be given a mushaf, or someone who behaves like a toddler. You cannot be given a mushaf because you will disrespect the mushaf. It doesn't matter about your feelings. It's not very relevant. The point is, this is a sacred text. You can't just give it to a kid who's going to throw it on the floor or stamp on it or drop it every 2 seconds, right? So when a kid is acting like that, you got to take that away because it's disrespectful. Then you have a kid who is able to do it. They have tamyiz. They're able to hold a mushaf without throwing it on the floor. They're able to have a mushaf without chewing on it. They're able to make sure it doesn't fall on the floor all every 2 minutes, etc. That kid is also able, in principle, to know if he has wudu or not, but is excused because of the general difficulty, right? So according to Ibn Hajar and Ramli, that is going to a Quran class. So again, they're saying there is harm, but the need is difficult, and so it's there, and it's specific to a Quran class. So your son cannot pick up the mushaf without wudu. Your son can pick up mushaf without wudu during Quran class, or going to Quran class, or going to school, or coming out from school, right? According to Ba Makhrama, who's arguably on the same level, he's one of the great Yemeni scholars of that same kind of era, Ba Makhrama, he said it's just unconditionally fine, right? It's unconditionally fine because of the general need for kids to pick up the mushaf, right? He's looking at that as that's hard enough. So he puts it on one side of the line, they put it on another side of the line, right? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So it's a similar kind of thing, but that's to do with kids, right? As opposed to, you know. And then also for the Shafis, when we say recite the Quran, again, an issue of definition. What do you mean by reciting Quran? So you got into a car while you're on your period, and you said, Subhanallah, sakharna hadha wa ma kunna lahu muqrinin wa inna ila rabbina lamunqalibun, right? You did a dua, which is a verse of the Quran. We had a nightmare. Allah, la ilaha illa huwa, la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm, right? You start doing Ayatul Kursi for protection. So the Shafi'is, the relied upon position in the Shafi school is they say Quran recited for protection, for barakah, or something like that. That's not Quran. That's something else. It's like a dua, right? So the relied upon position then is you could recite the whole Quran for protection. So you had a nightmare, so you did the whole khatam of the Quran while you're on your period. It's fine. Protection. No, like right, mashallah. You have a very good memorization of the Quran. Quickly memorize, quickly did a khatam of the whole Quran, right? For protection or something like that, right? You got attacked by jinns, you did a whole khatam immediately, something like that. That's fine because it's not considered Quran. You're not considered reciting Quran, you're considered doing a dua. Now, Az-Zarkashi, he's not that final tabaqa, he's not that last level of kind of final answer in the Shafi school of like Ramli and Ibn Hajar. He's a bit before that, Zarkashi. He said what it means is reciting something that is found in the Quran and outside of the Quran. So, for example, somebody says, how are you doing? You say, Alhamdulillah. When you said Alhamdulillah, were you reciting the Fatiha? Or were you saying Alhamdulillah? So, no, bro, just saying Alhamdulillah. When you said Bismillah, were you reciting the Quran? No, just saying Bismillah. Okay. When you said, I don't know. So he said something that is found in the Quran and outside of the Quran. Obviously, you can recite that if in janaba or if you are in on your period. Whereas whereas what was it? Something that is only found in the Quran, you cannot do that, right? But that is not a relied upon position. Not a relied upon position. There's another discussion as well in the Shafi school is can you recite the Quran in janaba anyway? So janaba meaning major ritual impurity. So there's a debate in the Shafi school in reality. There is a weak position in the Shafi school. So Ibn Mundhir, it was of the opinion that you can do that. Like it's not haram, right? He said, so we have a hadith that is Hasan, borderline, it's borderline acceptable, that the Prophet ﷺ would recite the Quran, that nothing would hold the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ back from reciting the Quran except janaba, right? So Ibn Mundhir, he says this hadith is weak. So he said, we do not have evidence then in the Shafi school because the hadith is weak. Ibn Mundhir, he says the hadith is weak and there is no evidence that it's haram to recite Quran and janaba. One would assume, and again, we'd have to go back into the 4th century and go and ask Ibn Mundhir, what was your opinion then regarding a woman menstruating? Because frequently in the Shafi school, they are treated as the same, and frequently they are not treated as the same, right? So often, for example, we're going to see in a second, we'll see next week, that a woman, that there's certain things, for example, you can't fast. You can't fast on your period, but you could fast on your janaba. So when you need to make ghusl, you can fast, right? Let's say you just I don't want to pray today. I'm not going to pray. Can I still fast? Right? This person's in janaba. They need to make ghusl. They don't make ghusl, but they just fast anyway. So you could fast in janaba. You couldn't fast on your menstruation. So we'd have to go back in the 4th century and ask Ibn Mundhir, hey, when you said it's halal to recite Quran in janaba, did you imply as well that a woman could recite Quran while she's on her period? Or is that not the case? Right? So this is one of these issues is that whenever you have any opinion within a madhab or outside of the form of madhab, we have to know what it means, right? So when I go open Ramli, Ibn Hajar, Makhrama, it's very specific. There's a whole literary context that they're talking in, and they're very, very accurate with the words, and I know what you're saying. Right? You say, I don't want to follow one of the form of madhab. I'm going to follow the fatwa of Ibn Abbas. What did Ibn Abbas actually say? Right? And see, if I can't tell you what Ibn Mundhir said, who's in the 4th century, then how can I tell you what Ibn Abbas said? So people will come along and said, they give a fatwa from, Ibn Abbas gave this fatwa, Sayyidina Ali gave this fatwa. There's one of the reasons why we'll follow them form of madhab is we actually know what they're saying. It's hard enough to know what the Imams are saying, let alone somebody outside of the form of madhab, whose fatwa have not been documented, have not been clarified, have not been checked and verified. Like we don't actually know what you mean. So in principle, right, you can follow anything, but half the time it's actually very difficult to find out whether you even mean that quote, is it accurate? And what does it even mean? Right? So I think that kind of answers that question, inshallah. Do we have a similar question in the Shafi school? Yes and no, but it's not quite the same. Okay. So the next thing then is entering the mosque, which is the same as somebody in janaba. They cannot. Let's finish. Let's finish this chapter because it is useful. So entering the mosque. So a woman cannot enter the mosque. Right? What it means you cannot enter the mosque is 2 things. Either like somebody in major ritual impurity. So you're in i'tikaf, for example, and you had a wet dream. So now you have to go make ghusl. Can you just stay in the masjid and make ghusl later on? No, you cannot. It is haram to be in the masjid if you need to make ghusl. Now, a woman is the same, who's on a period is the same thing. She cannot remain in the masjid. She goes into the masjid and sits down. You can't do that. Right? This is the position of the form of dhahib. You can't do that. You can't just go in a masjid on your period. But can you enter it? Here it says entering it. It doesn't say staying in it. Right? So here it says remaining in a masjid. Here it's talking about entering a masjid. So in reality, she can enter a masjid, right? And she's just like the junub. Why do they say this? Because they're speaking theoretically, which is here's a woman from whom najasa is coming. Blood is coming out of her private parts. So if there is a possibility of this filth getting into the masjid, then it would be haram, right? But if that's not the case, which is normally not the case, right? This woman is not insane. She's, you know, a clean woman. She's obviously not going to be doing that. Then it's totally fine for her to. Then she is exactly the same as a person. So she may enter a masjid, but she may not remain in a masjid. So, for example, she comes in one door, leaves the other. It's fine, right? She can't do tawaf because tawaf is like prayer, and prayer you need to have wudu, and so you cannot do tawaf. And unlike somebody in major ritual impurity, she cannot have intercourse, right? So in order to have intercourse, she has to finish her period and then make ghusl. So then the question comes, what if your wife is a Christian or a Jew? How is she supposed to make ghusl? She doesn't believe in it. And innamal a'malu binniyat, actions are only by intentions. So we say, this Muslim man tells his Christian or Jewish wife that it is haram for me to sleep with you until you finish your period and you do a ritual bath. She's like, I don't care about ritual bath. This is a load of nonsense. Your religion is false. We had this discussion before, right? And he says, I understand you believe my religion is false, but I'm asking you to do that. So she does it with no niyyah. Her only thing is, okay, my husband's asking me to do this. That is sufficient, right? That is sufficient. And so we say, why is it so, and so that counts, and that her ghusl counts, and it is halal for him to be intimate with her, and the water that comes off her body is also used, right? As opposed to somebody had a shower, the water that comes off your body is not considered used, right? But the water comes off your body from ghusl, from wudu, or this scenario, a kitabiyya, a Jew or Christian, who made ghusl in order to become halal for her husband. This also becomes used because لِإِزَالَتِهِ الْمَانِعِ, because it removed a ritual barrier. It did actually do something. Okay. The last thing then that is haram, not the last thing, because also divorce is haram during her menstruation. But anyway, then the next thing that the text mentions is, so it is haram to divorce your wife during menstruation, but it is valid. Right? It still counts, but it's haram to do that. So the only time you can divorce your wife is that is halal to divorce your wife is in her period of purity before you have slept with her in that period of purity. So a man has decided that he wants to divorce his wife, and he slept with his wife in this period of purity. He should wait till she finishes that, and then wait till she starts her period, finishes her period, and then divorces her. Right? So that's a separate discussion. Okay, so then intercourse itself, okay, and then seeking sexual enjoyment from between the woman's navel, belly button, and knees, right? So here we have three positions on this issue. I'm going to mention the relied upon position and the details that come from that relied upon opinion, and then I'll mention the other two positions in a second. So the relied upon position is, as mentioned, right, that it is haram to have intimacy between the navel and the knee. Notice it says here the woman's navel and knee, but it says the navel and the knee. According to Ibn Hajar, that applies to both husband and wife. Why? Because both of them lead to intercourse. So he touches her between her navel and her knee, or she touches him between his navel and knee while she's on her period. Both of them can lead to intercourse. So they are both haram, right? That's according to Ibn Hajar, right? So one debate is, does it apply to both men and women? According to Ibn Hajar, yes. The other discussion is, what do you mean by enjoyment? Do you mean skin contact, or do you mean sexual enjoyment? So here you're going to find the late scholars using different phrases in different books. Some of them will use the phrase istimta', which means enjoyment, sexual stimulation. The others will use saying mubashara, which means skin to skin contact. So this woman, for example, this man is going to touch his wife's thigh with the skin without the intent of sexual enjoyment for some practical reason. Is that halal? According to certain definitions on the late school, no, because it's skin to skin contact, right? And according to other definitions, it's fine because it's not istimta', it's not sexual enjoyment. A woman, for example, is covering her legs and he looks at her legs with lust. If we say istimta', that would be haram. If we say mubashara, which means skin to skin contact, it's not haram because it's not skin it is not it's not skin to skin contact. So is the issue skin to skin contact between the navel and the knee, or is the issue sexual enjoyment between the navel and the knee? That's an issue of debate. And does it apply to both men and women, or does it only apply to the woman? That's an issue of debate. Okay, among the late scholars. So when we say that, these are very, very fine points, and you can follow any of those opinions. When you have, for example, Ibn Hajar says, well, something, Romney says something else, Khatib says something else. These are kind of the school has already been accurately preserved and explained, and so these are fine things that you can just kind of hair splitting that you can go on forever about. Now we mentioned there were three positions on this issue. Position number one, this is not haram, right? And this is a weak position. But position number one is that this is not haram, right? And this is based on the fact that there's a hadith in Sahih Muslim that the Prophet said, do anything other than intercourse. So intercourse is haram, anything other than intercourse is halal, right? And this is a position espoused by Imam Muhammad. You see it in the Muwatta of Imam Muhammad, he mentions that. He says, as long as there's no touching of blood, because that's no touching filth, then any sexual activity between husband and wife that is other than intercourse, right? Then this is fine. And so this is a position in the Shafi'i school. It's also the position of the Hanbali school, and it's also the position adopted by Imam Nawawi. So Imam Nawawi adopted it, I believe, in his commentary Sahih Muslim and other places. So Imam Nawawi, he adopted that, his personal opinion, right? So key concept. There is a difference between Imam Nawawi as an editor of the Shafi'i school and Imam Nawawi as an independent thinker, thinking within the framework of the Shafi'i school. So he's wearing two different hats. One is called Mujtahid Tarjih. I have been asked to look at all of these positions and find out which position best represents this scholarly organization. That's one role. Another role is I am using the Shafi'i methodology to come to a conclusion based on the Quran and Sunnah, and my conclusion is this. Right? So I remember having a discussion with the big Salafi Sheikh, Sheikh Hassan Mashhour. He's a big Salafi Sheikh in Jordan, and he was like he during the discussion with him, he realized I was Shafi, and he's like, why are you Shafi? There's no reason to be Shafi. Even Imam Nawawi left the Shafi school. That's not true. Imam Nawawi is a graduate from the Shafi school. Right? There's a fundamental difference between somebody who has left a school as opposed to somebody who has a graduate from the school. So Imam al-Tahawi, for example, left the Shafi'i school and became Hanafi. And Imam Tahawi graduated from the Hanafi school and disagreed on certain issues with the final answers of the Hanafi school, but he essentially is a Hanafi. He's working as a Hanafi, right? So that's a totally different thing. So what we hear certain people saying, for example, like the Sheikh, he's like, no, just follow Quran and Sunnah. Meaning what? Meaning look at the Quran and Sunnah with no training and just some very nebulous systems. Whereas Imam Nawawi, as a graduate of the Shafi school, is not looking at the Quran and Sunnah with very nebulous systems. He has very accurate systems. and very complex systems and very fruitful systems. And so someone like Imam Nawawi, like Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, someone like Ibn Taymiyyah, someone like, I don't know, any of these other kind of big thinkers, right? Ibn Taymiyyah is a Hanbali at the end of the day. Yes, some of his opinions may disagree, but these are not called ijtihadat, these are called ikhtiyarat. He's adopting positions within the Hanbali school that might not be relied upon, but he's still working as a Hanbali, right? Imam Nawawi is working as a Shafi'i, right? Even if he doesn't agree, Ibn Mundhir is working as a Shafi'i, even though he doesn't agree necessarily with some specifics. But there's a fundamental difference in somebody who is a graduate and somebody who is abandoning something. Totally different. You ditched high school. You didn't go to high school, right? You didn't even go. And you have opinions about literature and about you didn't even go there. What are you talking about? As opposed to someone who's a PhD in, for example, education, and they have a new opinion about how secondary education should work. Totally different worlds, right? So the Salafi emotion is great. We're all Salafi in the sense that we all want to follow the Salaf, but they are inviting people to not graduate, to not be trained, which is very, very dangerous, right? It's fundamentally problematic. It's very gratifying because it's very fast. Bing, bing, bing. ChatGPT is a Sahih hadith in this? No, great. Roll with it. It's really easy, right? It's super easy, but there's no refinement, right? There's no refinement, right? So Imam Shafi'i is to the Shafi'i school like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to Jiu-Jitsu. But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu comes from something. It doesn't come from nowhere, right? As opposed to Street Fighter 2, you know, Noor and Fareed, they start fighting in New York, in San Francisco at midnight. Like, what are you doing? You're just punching each other. Like, there's no training, there's no discipline, there's no concepts, deep concepts and deep sophistication. So anyway, going back to other point, Imam Nawawi's personal opinion is that following the Shafi'i system, the Quran and Sunnah does not prohibit any sexual activity between husband and wife other than intercourse. So that is a weak position, but it is the position of the Hanbalis and position of Imam Muhammad and the position of Imam Nawawi. Then we have the relied upon position, which is sexual enjoyment / skin-to-skin contact between the navel and the knee. And then is it the man and woman? That's an issue of debate. And then we have the third position, which is nuance. It says, if the husband and wife know that this activity will not result in intercourse, it's halal. Because they have wara, because they have taqwa, because they know how to control themselves. But if they don't, then it would be haram, right? So it's an issue basically on case-by-case scenario. That's position number 3, okay? And I mentioned these things because I remember, Mufti Mink, who I don't know if he's a Mufti or not. I'm not saying he's not a Mufti. I don't know if he's a Mufti or not. He's an amazing speaker. I really like his talks. I don't know if he is knowledgeable or not. I'm not sure. But, I remember him talking about this once, and he was just saying, like, this is pretty important. There are people live different lives and they have different needs, and people need to know about these things. These are not insignificant things, right? So this exactly goes back to the whole discussion of harm and difficulty, right? A sexual need is a real need. It's not a negligible need, right? Some people, they just don't ignore it. That like a Christian, blah, that's you don't need that. It's not important. It's for like the layman, right? It is actually a need. It's an important thing, and different men and different women have different needs in different times and different places, and so it's important to know the scope in order to to worship Allah properly. And the Mufti Mink was making this point, like some women have certain needs at certain times of the month, and it can be very difficult. So he's somebody, again, whether he's a Mufti or not, I don't know, but certainly he's somebody who works with people, right? And he's worked with communities for a long time, and he has a lot of amazing insights about people and how people work. And then anyway, the next is the same thing. So the 5 things unlawful for someone in major ritual impurity: prayer, reciting the Quran, touching the Mus'haf, same discussion; tawaf, same thing; remaining in a mosque, as we discussed. And there are 3 things that are haram for somebody in minor ritual impurity alone. You don't have wudu, you can't pray without wudu. And so a child who is not there yet mentally, like he's a toddler, they're not praying. So when they pray, they're not praying, right? So their prayer does not count because they're not actually praying. A child who is mentally there, right? So 6, 7, 8, they're there. Do you have wudu? Yes, no, right? They do actually have to have wudu to pray. So if your kid is 9 years old and they're going to pray without wudu, it's like, oh, it's okay. No, like either don't pray or go make wudu and pray. Like it's not a joke. This is worship. It's something serious. We're talking to our creator. You got to take it seriously. So either don't pray, you want to sit out, go and sit out. Or in the Shafi school, in principle, you can't do that for the fard, right? We have to tell our children to pray from the age of 7. But, you know, there are other opinions within the madhahib. So, but you tell your kid, like, you don't want to pray? Okay. But you need to have wudu, bro. Like, you cannot pray without wudu. It's not halal. Can't do that. Tawaf, with a little kid, you can do that. So you have a toddler, you can make wudu for him. And you take him around, and that counts. So a toddler could actually make tawaf or hajj, right? And so you can make wudu for the little kid. For the older kid, he has to make wudu for his etc. And then touching the whole of the Quran, again we mentioned for somebody who has not reached puberty yet, according to Ba Makhrama, unconditionally he can touch and hold the Quran. According to Ramli and Ibn Hajar, he can touch the Quran for the purposes of dirasa, right? For the purposes of his schooling, etc. Khair, inshallah. And we'll stop there and we'll come back to
Sheikh Farid, may I ask a quick question?
yes, but I want to let everybody go because we've gone over time first. So give me a second. Okay, I'm just going to stop the recording. Okay, inshallah.
Okay.
Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.